Hello, everyone. We are going to begin. My name is Aaron Dickinson from Showing Time, and I'll be your presenter today. I do have the privilege here of speaking to a lot of old friends and familiar names here on this list. I used to be an active participating agent in your market, sold real estate in the Twin Cities area for about a decade. And so it's great to be able to come back today to talk to you all about housing stats and how to use InfoSparks in particular. And so we're going to get right into things here, but I do put up this slide here in case anyone does have any audio issues. And today what we're going to do is talk about InfoSparks, how to access it, and the way you can use InfoSparks to slice and dice the housing market up. You can look at what's going on a regional level, but you can also drill this in to look at very specific segments of the market. And so when we're talking about what's going on in real estate, it's always been that adage, real estate is local, right? So what happens nationwide, what happens in California, or what's happening in New York or Florida isn't necessarily what's going on locally. And what's going on locally can also have different environments too, where what's going on in Minneapolis might not be the same as what's going on in Lakeville or Farmington. And so we can use InfoSparks to look at regional data. We can also use it to look at very specific local data or look at different segments like new construction versus existing, single family versus condo, etc. So we're going to walk through some of those things. And I just put this audio check back up on the screen here because we do have a couple more people who are having audio issues. So I'm trying to make sure that they get those instructions there. We've got a lot of people on the call today, 240 and counting. I'm excited to have you all here. So we're going to get right into things here and look at InfoSparks. InfoSparks has been a member service from NorthstarMLS for many years. And so many of you probably know how to get into InfoSparks and have hopefully used it before. At the end, I'll kind of show you all the different ways you can access InfoSparks. But for now, we're going to go ahead here and walk through just some basics on how to use InfoSparks first. So when you first load up InfoSparks, you're typically going to be looking at the entire regional stats. So by default here, we're loading the Twin Cities region, and we can look at a whole bunch of metrics. And before I do that, let me zoom in this screen just a bit here for you. All right. And so at the bottom, we have many metrics here that we can look at. And right now we would be looking at those at a regional level. But I wanted to take a minute here and show you all the ways you can narrow your focus down before we talk about all the metrics. So in the upper left-hand corner here, we see Twin Cities region. If we click on that, we can scroll through a list of available areas. We can filter by different types of areas. Or we could just simply start typing in the box to find the location we want to look at. So in this case, I can start typing and you'll see it's narrowing the list down, and I want to look at sales activity in the city of Bloomington. So when I click on that option, you might have noticed that the chart below has been updated. So now we're looking at just the sales activity in Bloomington. We can do some further refinements of this data by filtering based off of characteristics of the properties that are selling. So we can narrow this list down further, but based off of the price range, property type, construction type, seller type, which would be a traditional or a foreclosure or short sale, as well as square footage, bedrooms, and waterfront. So for example, if I want to come in here and look at just single family properties, I can do so. We can also narrow it further down to be previously owned properties only. We could also narrow it down by a square footage range. And in the case where there's a filter applied, like for example, 2001 to 2,500 square feet, if you want to look at anything that's 2001 square feet or larger, you can add additional filters here by clicking on the plus button. And now we're looking at anything that's 2001 or larger. Or we can hit the split button here at the top and actually split it out into different segments of the market. So here now we're charting the median sales price in Bloomington of single family previously owned properties in the 2001 to 2,500 square foot range or 2,501 and larger. And as one would expect, that the typical property that's larger sells for significantly more money. We can also customize a couple of these sets of filters. So the price range and square footage range filters have a custom option here. So I can come in here and create my own ranges. And then once I've created my own ranges, I can then run stats on those and split those out too into different segments as well if I'd like. And so this is an easy way to see how different parts of the same market are operating. In this case, we're looking at single family properties that are previously owned in specific square footage ranges. Another kind of common split that you might do is looking at the difference between single family, condo, and townhouses and seeing how those different segments of the market are operating in as well. And in this case too, you know, trends, InfoSparks is really about trends. It's also good to kind of visualize what's going on, again, both locally as well as regionally. And so in this kind of a situation here, it's natural to understand that single family properties are going to probably sell for more in a suburban area like Bloomington. But one of the things that I find interesting is to look to see how is that separation change over time between those. So there's always been a separation, and in the Bloomington market, condos are typically on the bottom here. And over time, how has that changed, or how has that changed more recently? And so in median sales price, for example, we can see that single family homes in the last 12 months are up 11.1%, condos are up 8.6%, and townhouses are up 9.7%. So in Bloomington, all three property types are really, they're trending in the same direction, obviously, and they're trending pretty close together. But what you'll find is that that's not necessarily true in all areas. It again gets back to that real estate is local. And it depends a lot too on the kind of housing stock that's in that market. And so Bloomington's a pretty well-established market. It's most of the properties there have been constructed, 20, 30 years ago or more. And so you don't have as much of an influence of new construction. And in this situation, I even went so far as to filter out new construction. So I was really trying to compare properties that are all somewhat similar. We're not, because new construction is kind of its own beast, right? So that's some of the analysis you can do there. Now I want to kind of simplify things out for us. We can also compare other areas together. So at the top here, we have an Add an Area tab, and we can add up to 3 additional areas to compare against. And so this allows us to get a sense for what's going on in the market as a whole, as well as comparing one to another. So right now what I want to do is kind of look really big picture. So I'm going to compare the Twin Cities region to the Brainerd area and to the St. Cloud area and to the Rochester area. And so here again, right now we're looking at just the median sales price. So there's a couple things to keep in mind when working with multiple tabs is that, number one, in a lot of cases, comparing 4 areas is just too much. It gives you too much data and it'll be pretty wild and crazy. In this case, this is all very clean, so it's pretty easy. But usually I suggest comparing one area to another and trying to avoid getting over detailed and doing too much analysis at once. The second thing is that when you add new tabs at the top here, you start off with that active tab having no filters applied. So right now we're looking at all of the sales activity in these 4 market areas with no filters. If I want to look at a specific segment of the market, say for example, the single family properties, I need to apply that filter in this tab or click back to the original tab I was working on and any filters that were applied in that tab will then be applied to the charts below. So whichever tab is active at the time, those are the filters that are being applied there. All right, and so I do have a couple other people on the line here who are helping answer questions. There's so many people here that there's a lot of questions coming through, so it's going to be pretty hard for me to address every individual question, but I am going to try to pick up on some of these questions to help answer live, and then the rest of them we're either messaging you through GoToWebinar right now, or if we need to, we'll circle back with you after the webinar. And we are recording today's webinar, so you will get a copy of this recording in case you had any issues with audio or if you want to revisit anything. And so, looking here at the trends, for example, here of median sales price, and let's go back to looking at all properties, we can see that it's just like we were talking about in Bloomington, where prices for condos, single family, and townhouses were all trending up. Same thing here, they're all kind of trend in lockstep. But one of the things I thought was interesting was how Brainerd in the last year and a half has started to trend further higher. And so we're seeing now that Brainerd and Rochester were pretty much in lockstep on price, but Brainerd is now growing their median sales price at a faster clip. We see the same thing if at the bottom here we look at price per square foot, and we could see that same kind of divergence there too, where in this case here we could see how Brainerd's price per square foot, which kind of helps address the issue with the disparity in the size of homes selling. We could see here how price per square foot Brainerd really took off, and took off around the time that coronavirus started to hit us last year, right? And so one of the stories is that we've seen a lot of commentary about is people are relocating and doing more remote work or getting second homes to have a place to go to. And so the Brainerd area certainly seems to have been a beneficiary of that trend, and you could see that very clearly here in these kinds of stats. So I'm going to go now and just simplify things out here and go back to a very basic chart and walk you through all of the different metrics that we have available and some of the other things we can do for charting. And so at the bottom here, we have a whole bunch of metrics. We start off with the median sales price here as the default, but we can also look at average sales price. We can look at things like new listing activity and see that trend over time, or things like the inventory of homes for sale, pending and closed sales. There's a couple metrics down here that may be less familiar. One is shows to pending. And so this is using showing times, showing data to give you the number of the number of showings it takes for a property to go from active to pending status. And this is based off of any filters that you had applied above for geography and property type, et cetera. And then also a limited subset of the properties that have showing time enabled. Now, showing time is a very popular product. Most properties have it, but we do exclude properties that don't have showing time enabled in this stat that's provided. And so this gives you a sense of how many showings does it take to sell a home. Gives you that relative measure of kind of buyers per property, or also helping set expectations with a seller up front of how many showings do they think that their home will take to sell? How long do you think it'll be on the market? What should you expect for pricing? You can use all of the stats you have here to help give those expectations to the seller, and then also use that as a benchmark when listing the home and having it on the market. This year, I'm finding that the second half of this year, we're moving back more into the seasonal trends in the market that we kind of gave up on last year. But really, if you look at 2019 and before, the Minnesota market, but most of the country is seasonal, right? So things start to cool off in the late summer into fall. Showing activity declines, sales will decline, prices sometimes soften a bit. And if you look at a lot of these trends, and we're going to here in a few minutes, you'll notice that a lot of those trends are showing the same kind of thing, that what's happening this year might be happening at a different level than it did in 2019, but it's following the same general trend. And so, if you've got a property that's been on the market for a couple of weeks and hasn't had an offer yet, now a couple of months ago, that might have been a unicorn. Today, that might be a semi-frequent occurrence because the market, again, is starting to cool off, taking that seasonality into account. So you can help benchmark against the MLS as a whole and go, well, okay, so properties that closed last month sold in this many days. Properties that sold had this many showings. If you're hitting those benchmarks and you still don't have an offer, you can provide that information back to the seller and say, listen, by now more than half of properties have already sold. We don't have an offer. Maybe it's time for us to make a course correction. The shows per listing stat also uses showing time showing data. And this is telling you how many showings are happening on average per listing per month. And so this would be very helpful to specifically look at a listing that's been on the market, say, for a couple of months. We know showing activity declines. And so if you're not getting any showings or you're only getting one or two, if you look at comparable homes in the area, you could see that relative showing performance they're having and help determine, is it that right now there's no buyers in this market segment? Or is it more likely it's just that they've simply already seen the home or have already dismissed the home and they're out looking at other properties that are more attractive to them? So again, that might give you some information and context to help discuss with the seller making a course correction. So let's go here to pending sales. There's a lot of things we can do here to visualize pending sales data in different ways. And so by default, we're looking at all of this different sales activity in a rolling 12-month view. So we're effectively annualizing these trends. And so looking at the default here, if we're looking at pending sales, we see 66,194, which is up 2.4%. We're not saying that there are 66,000 pending sales in October. We were saying that there are 66,194 pending sales in the 12 months ending October. So it's an annualized number here. And so if I were to want to look at this, the key with annualizing this data with this rolling 12, it does a great job of giving you long-term trend understanding and insights. It smooths out all of the monthly volatility and the seasonality and shows you that ultimate where is demand. And so from something like this, we can see, here was the impact from COVID-19 when it first hit, and what happened after that. Buyer demand came back, but then it surged. So a whole bunch of additional buyers came into the market, and on an annualized rate, buyer activity was up dramatically, more than 10,000 from pre-COVID levels. Now, we are now seeing that annualized activity is declining, so buyer activity is starting to come back down. But if we look in the last 12 months, sales have still been much stronger than in the couple of years before COVID. So, again, providing context, some of the comments I've seen in Facebook groups, about, well, the market's turning, maybe there's a crash coming. Keep in mind that we were just so crazy in the market. There was so much going on that anything that slows down at all starts to feel like it could be, a negative, whereas it's just trying to revert back to normal or even previous levels potentially. So, so for context, you're still well ahead of where you would have been before COVID in terms of sales activity. So the other way we can look at this is in a shorter rolling period or the monthly view. So in the monthly view, now we see that there were 5,607 pending sales in the Twin Cities region just for the month of October. And we could see exact counts for every single month, and we see that seasonality in those trends over time. We can also look at this in different time frames. The 1-year view is actually last year plus the current year. And then there's the max view, which is my favorite, but I'll warn you, it can get a little bit long to load. And so in the max view here, we can go all the way back to 2005, the good old days, before the housing market first first had a crash. And when I was practicing, one of the charts I would pull out was home prices in the Twin Cities haven't fallen in 50 years straight. And I had a great chart for that. And then, of course, a couple of years after I started using that chart, prices actually did retreat when we had the housing correction. And so we can look at really long time scales here and look at that long-term fundamental demand. So in a monthly view, as I said, it's a very seasonal market, right? Sales activity peaks May, June every year, bottoms every December, January, somewhere in there, pretty much without fail, except for last year, things were a little different, right? So I think we're reverting back to the seasonalities that we saw in 2019 and the years before. So if I look at this in a rolling 12-month view, this is a good way to help visualize that where is buyer demand today versus where has it been in the past. And we almost got up to the record annual levels here back in 2005, got real close. And so we can see that even if we shed a lot of buyer activity right now, we could still end up in a high level of buyer activity, which over the last 15 years would still be significantly higher than where it was when it was really rough selling real estate. So context is important. So even as the market's starting to cool just a bit, the overall activity is still very high on a historical level. So that's buyer activity in terms of pending sales, which is 30 to 60 days ahead of your close sales. So it's your leading indicator on buyer demand. The new listing activity tells a different story here. And this is really a story that I see throughout most of the country. We've got nowhere near the number of sellers in the market that we would need to have a balanced market. And that's not a short-term problem. That's a long-term systemic problem. It's been a problem for, I would argue, the market started to get back to kind of normalish 14, 15. So we're working on 5-6 years now of low seller activity, which has constrained supply beyond what I think any of us expected. I think we all thought at this point that there would be more sellers participating in the market. And certainly the number of new listings back in the last boom was, it was what, 40%, 50% higher than it is right now. So that limited supply is certainly affecting what's going on with activity. If we split this out, so this is an interesting analysis, and you could do this at a local level too. So now what I've done is I've added individual lines here for all construction types, as well as previously owned and new construction. So we can split them out. The all construction is adding the two of them up. But if we look here over time, we can see a couple stories. Number one, new construction activity never really recovered from the last boom. And so while it's been trending up over the last few years, it still isn't anywhere near where it was in the 2005, 2007 range. And again, we see the same thing with previously owned, with our existing homeowners, that their new listing activity isn't there as well. And so, when you've got strong buyer demand, you've got low new inventory coming in, it means that your total inventory and homes for sale obviously will decline substantially. And again, this kind of a chart takes a few seconds to load because I'm pulling up 15 plus years of history here. So, these basically the market that we are in today, the craziness of the last 18 months was certainly brought upon by the coronavirus, but it's been a trend over a long period that brought us to where we are. So overnight, no matter what happens, really, this housing market still has a lot of momentum onto to low inventory and strong buyer demand. It's going to take a lot to move that needle a different direction. And so none of this happened overnight. And if you look at when did inventory start to climb in the housing market, it was like 05, 06, you could kind of feel, oh, the market's topping. Inventory climbed over the next couple of years, but prices didn't really capitulate for several years after inventory started to go up. And you're still in a very, very tight inventory market. So anyway, so those are some of the different trends there. Also need to talk about a couple of the other features here of InfoSparks. So we've been looking at line charts up till now. And so now we're going to also take a look here at bar charts. And so in a bar chart format, we can look at up to 3 years worth of history. And so here, for example, we can see, let's look at new listing activity here. We can see new listing activity by construction type. So let's make this a little more simple even and just compare previously owned to new construction. And again, we hit home with that point that really the needle hasn't moved much. New construction is almost exactly where it was 2 years ago. And same thing with previously owned homes and new listing activity, is that in the 12 months ending October, we're basically where we were 2 years ago. We can again switch over here and look at this data in a monthly format as well. And then there's one other option in the bar chart, and that's doing a year-to-date view. And so in a year to date, it's kind of like a progress report. How are we doing so far this year? This is also potentially a way to help kind of benchmark yourself. How is your business doing versus your target market? So, you could search for the location that you do most of the sales in, potentially even the same price segment, and then get a sense for, how has that trended over the last couple of years versus how is your own book of business trending over the last few years? And so we can, when we have splits here, we can see those individually, or if you have just one single view here, like for example, let's do sales price. So median sales price over time. Bar chart here conveys just 3 points in time. It makes it a very clear comparison here. And what I like about this is that you have right on the chart itself, it gives you the year over year change in each of those. And then for each of the last 3 years here for October, it's reporting the specific number at the top. So this can be a nice chart to share out or use simply because trends and line charts can sometimes require more interpretation, whereas with this, I think this simplifies the point that you may be trying to convey. I'm a huge fan of coming into InfoSparks and just pushing buttons. Every time I use InfoSparks in a market, I learn something different about the market because I look at it in a little different way. And so flipping between line charts and bar charts and different time frames and monthly versus rolling periods and doing different splits, it's like, oh, well, that's cool, or oh, that's different. So you will learn things just simply by exploring and trying to analyze the market in different ways. And what's important is that you take what you experience locally and use that to help interpret what you're seeing. Prices are up, they're up for a number of reasons. But how that might specifically apply in your neighborhood may be different than how it applies to the region as a whole. And so, for example, the influence of new construction in your market area potentially, the influence of certain investors that might have come in and started buying up markets, all of those different nuances might be happening at a local level that might be attributing to some of these trends that the trend themselves can't express to you. You have to have that local market knowledge. All right, so let's go back here and look at a line chart. And now we've got a chart and we want to do something with it. What are our options there? So first thing we can do is hit the print button, and we can get a PDF or Adobe Acrobat file of the chart. There's some branding here at the top. I'll show you how you can change that in a few minutes. And then we can simply print this, email it, however we'd like to do it. So that's our print format. Under share, we have some additional options. First question that we're asked is, do we want a static chart or a live chart? And so with a static chart, we're getting a snapshot of what you see today and it will not change. With a live chart option, we have the ability to always see the most current data available in the chart that we share out. So for InfoSparks, we update it every night through the end of the month prior. And so with a live chart, if I come back to this chart in a couple of days, it'll be updated to reflect any late activity recorded in October that's been updated in the MLS. And that's one of the caveats to keep in mind, that the first few days of each month, the previous month hasn't quite yet been closed out, right? So there's still offices that are updating MLS records, and then we update those every night. And so I say wait till about the 5th or 6th of the month before you rely too heavily on numbers, particularly pending and closed sales. I did a chart yesterday on pending sales in the Twin Cities area, and then looked at that pending number from yesterday compared to what's in InfoSparks today. And InfoSparks today is reporting 500 more pending sales for October. And that's because that 500 got recorded in the MLS yesterday as closed, and then that got updated last night. So those updates are almost always the first couple of days of the month, a couple of business days into the first of the month. And so, normally 4th or 5th of the month, you're pretty safe to look at those numbers, and they shouldn't change much, but they will continue to change. So if you're sharing out a chart and quoting figures in the chart, say the number of sales in October, you wouldn't want your commentary to not match the chart anymore. So in that case, you probably do want to use a static chart. So let's look at the social media and email share. So you get a URL, you can copy and paste that into wherever you'd like to use it, or hit view a new window. A couple of things, this has some interactivity in it because it's a social media version versus PDF. We can download the PDF version in the upper right. In the upper left here, we have chiclets that allow you to quickly share this out to Facebook, Twitter, and others. At the bottom, you can download a PNG or picture of the chart. You can also download a CSV file for the chart, which is an Excel file that would allow you to create your own chart styles and types. And finally, you can also bookmark the chart and come back to it later. So since I chose that live chart option, what would be ideal is to bookmark charts that you regularly want to reference. And that could be your local market areas, or it could be markets that you do a lot of CMAs for, so you want to have easy access to updated stats to print out. So whatever charts that you think you'll want to reference regularly, if you create them as a live chart and then bookmark it, you won't have to log back into the MLS and then log back into InfoSparks and reapply all your settings and then share the chart out again. You can just go to that bookmark and it'll be updated for you. So it saves you a whole bunch of steps. Under the share option, we have, again, most of the time you'll want the live chart option. We also have the ability to embed this chart into a website or blog. And so this would, if you're talking on Facebook or Twitter, you want to use the social media version. But if you've got a website or blog and you want to put stats in for a local community, or create some stats pages, or make some blog posts about activity in the month, using this embedded chart option can be great because it'll fit more tightly into the rest of the site's content. And we can have it auto update for you every month so that you don't have to go back to it and update it when the new stats come out. So we can choose an image or interactive version, choose a default size to create a custom size, and then hit share. And so when I get that snippet of code, I would actually paste that entire snippet of code into my website's HTML, and then you would get something like this. It's got some branding built into the shared chart. We've got the interactivity like we have in InfoSparks, and this will get updated just like InfoSparks is updated. So it makes an easy way to do this once in your website and get it continually updated for you. So we've had an absolute mountain of questions coming in, and I've got some great help here in answering questions. I want to take a minute here and just scroll back up and see if there's a couple of questions I can help answer right now. So just hang on for 1 second here. So one question is, how do you know the number of homes that are being represented in any of the figures that we're looking at? And this is an excellent question here. So almost all of these metrics are going to be average or median or the sum of the sales in a market. But how do you know what that number represents? Well, and the best way to do that is to look at the sales numbers themselves. So for example, The median sales price is $340,000 in the Twin Cities in October 2021. How many sales made up that number? Well, if I click on the closed sales tab here, we could see that there were 5,775 closed sales. So that's what the number's based off of. The other thing you can do to get a sense for sample size or how many sales or listings are comprising a stat is how volatile it might look. So one thing that you could do, which would be bad, is get too specific. Like, and actually, I was able to do it right here. There's one sale. So if I go and look at sales price, it doesn't even have a chart. Or if I look at days on market, month supply, there's a little partial line. If you've got a very, very small geography, or if you've gone and gotten yourself into too specific of a set of filters, you may end up with no data to work off of. And so this doesn't replace what you would do for a CMA. You don't want to get so specific that you're down to 5 or 10 listings or even less. We want to see trends, and so we have to be a little bit more general. So you don't want to do, say, a range of 50 for square footage, because it's just too narrow. It's going to give you too little to work off of. So if you find that things are very volatile, let's do condo, new construction, foreclosure. There we go. So there's no data at all available for that. Or if we do a very large condo, you'll see very sharp changes in pricing. This gives you a good indication, this is month supply. Anytime you see a sharp change like this, that's telling you your sample size is probably pretty small. And so, and I can confirm that by looking at the closed sales or homes for sale, depending on the metric I'm looking at. So anytime you see jagged, sharp lines like that, check your sample size, because you might be too small. Sorry, that was a long answer. We did record the webinar, and you'll get a copy of the recording about an hour after the webinar is complete. The question about multifamily, we do not currently have multifamily listings available in the system. We're doing just the single family. Part of that is because the sample sizes on that are still pretty small, simply because there's not a lot of those sales. The export function to Excel, we did walk through that. In terms of areas that you can choose, there's tons of areas. So I saw several posts asking about, why is Rochester, Austin combined? Well, there's also Rochester and Austin are in here individually as well. And I'm just about to show you how you can actually draw your own area based off of a map and create your own custom defined area too. So you're not limited by just an MSA. You can do cities, counties, school districts in some areas, the zip codes as well. There's tons of ways to narrow that list down. All right, I'm going to continue through here because we've got a few things yet to finish up. The user manual and FAQ here at the top gives you a short demo video of the tool. If you have more questions, you can reach out to NorthstarMLS. Also in here talks about what the metrics are and how they're calculated. And the share feature is important to read about too. We do limit sharing. If a chart hasn't been loaded in about 6 months, it will eventually expire. There's ways to keep those charts from expiring by periodically loading those charts up. So there's more details on how that works there in the share section. And then the profile section allows you to upload your agent photo or logo and update your contact info that displays on the shared charts. Just make sure to hit the update profile button at the bottom. And then the My Areas section. This allows you to draw your own custom area and get around the limitations of the list of areas we gave you. There's tons in there, but you may want parts of a couple different cities, or you may want to create a little bit of a larger region. There are limits on how big of an area you can draw. but otherwise you can come in here and just simply click on the map and create an area. You can grab a circle here and adjust the size. You can click draw a circle and create an area out from a point. Delete shapes if you make a mistake. You can put multiple shapes on the map if you want to. And once you've got the area you want, you can just save it as whatever you'd like to name it. It will think for a second. It'll tell you how big of an area you have, how many listings are in it. Be careful not to make too small of an area with, again, no results or very few. For example, if you had this come up and it said it had 100 listings in it, that would be 100 over the last 15 years. So that's not a lot of data to work with. So once you've got that area created, hit See Stats. It'll now load that new custom area I just created, and I can slice and dice this up just like I could any other geography in Northstar. And in the future, if I want to come back to it, I can hit the My Areas option here, and I can see all of the other areas that I had previously created and load those charts up into the system as well. So with InfoSparks, you can really drill into details. We can filter by geography, get down to something specific. We can filter based off the different layers of the onion, look at single family only or different price points or square footages, look at line charts and bar charts up to 15 years of history, look at all those different metrics, customize price ranges and square footage ranges, create our own custom areas, and make charts that are great for sharing. If you do have any other questions, we're just wrapping up here in the next few minutes, but send those questions in and we'll either answer those during the call here, or we will circle back with you afterwards if we need to. So some use cases, you can create blog posts with stats information on them, have those stats updated for you automatically. We can look at specific properties or neighborhoods and demonstrate how that neighborhood is in demand, how price appreciation has been strong in that area. We can compare and contrast different segments of the market, new construction versus existing, for example. Compare and contrast different communities and show how their pricing trends have changed over time. Create tons of blog content or Facebook content. Talk about what's going on in the market. Talk a little bit about your own personal experiences recently, and use that to educate and inform your sphere as to what's going on locally and what's going on in their area, but also to remind them that you are the consummate professional, knowledgeable, and ready to assist them. But you're doing so in a way that provides them with information and value as opposed to just simply soliciting for business. So it's a great way to keep in touch with your sphere. All the data we're using comes from the MLS. It's the gold standard. Part of the reason you get notices to correct listings when there's issues there is because good data in means good data out. So it's important to have a quality database to run these reports off of, and that's what we have with the MLS. We are updating InfoSparks every night through the end of the month prior. I just suggest waiting till about the 4th or 5th of the month to let the numbers settle a little bit before I rely on them too much. Particularly pending and closed sales are the keys. That those will be the most volatile in the first few days of the new month. So median sales price probably won't change much after the numbers update on the 1st. Rolling 12-month view is the default view. It's great for seeing long-term trends in the big picture, but it eliminates the seasonality and monthly volatility, and it's important to know that as well. So I'm always switching between those views. I'm looking at short time frames and long time frames. I'm looking at a bar chart. I want to understand the makeup of those trends and look at it in different ways with different splits. So I'm coming at it from more than one angle. We all can get a little bit biased in our own perspectives based off of what you do when you're out selling. If you're always working with first-time home buyers, you see everything else with a first-time home buyer look. And so using InfoSparks, you can visualize the market in a different way and take a step back and try to think about what is this really telling me, and see if maybe you can learn a different perspective of the market by doing so. How to access it. InfoSparks is loaded all through Northstar. It's great. We have so many ways for you to access this tool. In Matrix, underneath the external links section, there's the InfoSparks link. There's also a little InfoSparks link right on the listing detail page for every property underneath the property photo. It's in that toolbar with all the rest of the action buttons. In Flex MLS, it's also available underneath menu in the product section. In Paragon, it's located in resources. In the portal, there's a big icon for it as well. In Showing Time, underneath the reports section, you can also click on that market stats link there. That'll load up InfoSparks too. And then finally, whenever you have a showing confirmation, you're getting an InfoSparks chart at the bottom of the confirmation details as well. So many, many ways to find InfoSparks. There's no excuses not to use it on a regular basis, and I hope all of you do. So comparing numbers, InfoSparks looks at data slightly different than Flex or Matrix will, in that if you run a stat, click the stats button in the MLS and compare that to InfoSparks, numbers might not match up identically. They might be different by 1 or 2, which is no big deal at all because every computer system looks at data slightly differently. Real estate data is actually extremely complex when you try to standardize and report on it. And so if numbers are a little bit different, it's nothing to worry about. If you find that the numbers between what InfoSparks is reporting and something you did in the MLS directly or some other source, keep in mind that oftentimes it's an issue of not comparing apples to apples. So look at whether your filters are all set up the same or not. The other thing, we do a tiny bit of data scrubbing in InfoSparks. If a property says it's been on the market for 2,000 days, we'll assume it hasn't been on the market for the better part of a couple decades and exclude that days on market calculation, but still include the rest of the data in our calculations. The reports that we're providing here are based off of NorthstarMLS data and only NorthstarMLS sales data. The only exception to that is the showing data, which does come from showing time, from all of the showing activity that happens on those listings. And anytime we're reporting that showing data, we're reporting on the subset of listings that had showing time enabled on them. If you have questions, the user manual and FAQ has a lot of good information in there. There's also the demo video in there, and you'll get a copy of this webinar recording as well. And then finally, you can contact Northstar's help desk if you have other questions and need assistance. And you are welcome to share these reports out. I hope you do. Don't be a secret agent. When I was practicing in your market, I used this data all the time, and it ended up being that news organizations found me and wanted to talk to me because I knew the market and could provide some local context. So if you use this for yourself, use this with your customers for communication, use this as a way to keep in touch and to inform the market about what's going on. I think you're going to find that it can be a very beneficial component of your business. We just ask that when you share out any of our reports, you keep the citations that are already built into the reports at the bottom that says where the data came from. Just like in college, it's important to cite your sources. And that is our webinar. There's a lot that we covered today. I'm going to go back here now and see if there's any questions that I can answer shortly. And we tried to do our best here to answer all of the questions we could over text too. So thank you so much for coming. You'll get a copy of this recording in about an hour. So there's a good question about here in days on market. How are those reported? We're reporting days on market of closed properties. So the DOM is for a month is based off of the properties that closed in that month. Their days on market, active to pending status effectively. Had a couple questions come in here about the MSAs that I was using, the metropolitan statistical areas. I just wanted to give you big picture of comparing one region to another region. The Twin Cities is a huge area and it's not all the same in it either. So there, with InfoSparks, you can compare lots of local locations or drill down into a very specific area and draw your own map. So you certainly can run stats at any level you want to. But I just wanted to give you some big picture views, and those were the big picture regional areas that were easy to compare for the example. So question about saving reports. The best thing to do is to share out that live chart and then bookmark that URL and be able to come back to that regularly. We unfortunately don't have an auto email function at this time. We talked about the bar charts that were available there. We only can chart one metric per chart, so we can split that up into different segments of the market, but we don't have a way currently to put closed sales and new listings on the same chart, for example. There was a question about the site security. The charts are not on a secure server at this time. That doesn't mean anything from a safety standpoint. You're not providing any private credentials to access and you're not submitting any credit card information. We do use a secure logging in technology to get you from the MLS into InfoSparks. So InfoSparks is only available to Northstar members to log in like I did and to work through creating all those charts. But the shared charts you share out are available to anybody who you give the URL to. In terms of sharing these charts in, like, say, a PowerPoint presentation, you could actually, the best thing to do is probably to share it as a social media chart, and then at the bottom left, you can click on one of the icons in the bottom there and download an image of the chart. That would be one way, or just do a screen print is also another way to do it. The downloading of the CSV file, if you download a CSV file, once you've downloaded it, that file won't be updated because it's no longer on our servers. So even if you download the CSV file from a live chart, once that file's on your computer, it's static at that point. But you could go back to that live chart and download a new copy in the future. All right, so that covers most of the questions that I think I can do at this moment. So thank you again for everyone for coming today. Sorry we went a little bit late, but it was very good. If you do need anything else, please feel free to reach out to NorthstarMLS's help desk. They are fantastic. And we will send a copy of this recording here in about an hour. Again, thanks so much. Have a great day.